Michael Walsh from Sydney University is an expert on harvest weed seed control economics and different systems available to you as well. So if you're looking to get into this game at all, Michael can give you a rundown now on some of the systems that we've got available in harvest weed seed control, how they work, and then we'll go out and say have a look around at some of the gear we've got sitting around and we'll finish up the day. Michael, let's go.
How are you, Tom? Good afternoon, everyone. Good to have the chance to talk to you today, and hopefully you can see the screen okay. So just to introduce myself, Michael Walsh, I'm Director of Weed Research at the University of Sydney, and I've spent quite a few years doing the research on efficacy of harvest weed seed control systems. So to start off with the why, it was a pretty simple answer, and that is that you're targeting the weed seeds that are there on plants that have survived through your crop until harvest. Now, more often than not these days, those weed seeds contain the genes for resistance. So if you can do something about them going back into the seed bank, then it's a good idea to do it. The numbers at the bottom of the screen indicate the potential for harvest weed seed control efficacy on wild oats, wild radish, ryegrass and brome grass. They're pretty high numbers, around about 80 to 90%. So that's the percent of total seed production that you can potentially target with a harvest weed seed control system right at the first opportunity to harvest. Just showing this photo to indicate that any weed seeds that come in the front of the harvester, if you're not doing something about them at the back of the harvester, then they just get spread back across the paddock, and it is a weed seed spreading exercise, and really it is a weed seeding exercise. It's a good way of establishing a crop of weeds, if you like. Just a bit of a brief description about the systems. The two different types. So those that target the chaff and the straw. So that's narrow windrow burning and bale direct. So they collect, remove, concentrate, whatever, both lots of residue or both types of residue coming out the rear of the harvester. Then the chaff only systems, the chaff lining, chaff tram lining, the chaff carts and the impact mill. Just reinforcing the message that you've heard quite clearly from Brett and Cassie, etc. If you're getting the harvester set up properly for making sure all the grain comes out and finishes up in the grain tank, then you're also doing the right thing as far as targeting weed seeds. So the weed seeds also need to get out of the rotor, go across the sieves and out in the chaff fraction. And then I've got indicated in there the location of a baffle. If you've got a chaff only targeting system, then that baffle is important to keep the straw out of the chaff. Ideally, you want to be processing as much chaff material, as little chaff material as possible. You don't really want straw getting into it. And that, of course, is particularly important for the impact mill systems. So just talking about impact mills, there's 4 of them available now. Although the Seed Hog, I believe, has got limited availability, but the most commonly available are the Redicop, the Seed Terminator, and the HWSC. In general terms, they're great systems. They're something that we've been waiting for quite a long time. They're a residue processing mill, and they're called impact mills because there's lots of impacts going on that result in weed seed destruction. They're all highly effective, so they can deliver up to 90% plus of weed seed destruction, which is perfect. They are also the most compatible for conservation cropping systems because they allow full residue retention. All the other harvest weed seed control systems have some level of removal or concentration of material in the paddock. And of course, there's no after harvest work with the impact mill systems. Chaff lining, chaff tram lining, it's just really the concentration of the chaff material into narrow rows. And then once you've done that, the idea is to leave those rows alone, and hopefully the weed seeds will decay or not be spread back across the paddock through any other of your practices or operations. So the chaff rows are quite narrow, they're quite concentrated, and they are a relatively hostile environment, particularly for weed seedling emergence. There's a number of different ways you can set them up for chaff tram lining. There's the chaff deck system, which has powered belts to take the chaff material away from the top sieve and placed onto the wheel tracks. You can also have a homemade system, if you like. It's a twin chute system, which uses airflow and gravity to place the chaff material onto the wheel tracks. Similarly, for chaff lining, you can get a West Oz Boilermaker kit to concentrate that chaff material, or there's plenty of do-it-yourself options available. You can make them out of draper board or sheets of metal, core flute, whatever. It's a pretty simple process. It's just concentrating that chaff material. And again, just a reminder, that baffle is important for reducing the straw input into that chaff, because with these systems, the straw material can clog them up, particularly if it's a bit green and ropey. So the chaff lining and chaff tram lining, I guess we generally refer to them now as entry-level systems. We used to talk about narrow windrow burning in those terms, but chaff lining and tram lining, they relocate the weed seeds into concentrated strips, and more often than not, you see emergence of weed seedlings from those strips, and that makes them a good indicator of just how efficient you've been in collecting weed seeds during harvest and putting them where you want them to go. If you've got lots of chaff, you can increase weed seed survival over the summer period in particular, but also lots of chaff means that those weed seeds don't often turn into weed seedlings. So it's the chaff material forms a physical barrier which the germinating seedlings can't push through. In terms of managing the emergence on those chaff lines, you can have a dedicated nozzle on your spray boom to put a high amount of herbicide on those strips. Other growers prefer to just leave them alone and know that any weed seeds that are produced by those weeds will go back through the harvester and then back onto the strips. But if you've got sheep, they've been known to preferentially graze that chaff material. It's actually easier for them to graze that chaff when it's concentrated in strips than picking it up off the paddock. We have learned over the years through some fairly extensive trials that the systems are all similarly effective. So no matter what harvest weed seed control system you've got or you want, they will do the same level of reducing your subsequent annual ryegrass emergence. And that, of course, is assuming that they're set up properly and the systems are installed properly. So over the series of tests that we've done, on average, you get about a 60% reduction in annual ryegrass emergence the following year. And that's even with a 90% impact or more on your weed seeds at harvest. The reason why you don't get frequently you don't get a 90% or 100% reduction is because there's a seed bank. So for annual ryegrass, it usually has a pretty good seed bank. And the level of seed bank determines how good your efficacy is at harvest, or sorry, your efficacy is in subsequent emergence. If you've got a big seed bank, then you will get a reduced impact, so you probably get about a 30% reduction in emergence. If you've got a small seed bank, then you probably get about a 90% reduction in emergence. And finally, just looking at the cost, there is quite a bit of detail about working out the costing of these systems. It's not just a purchase price, it's also about subsequent operations if needed and wear rates on things like mills, etc. Peter Newman has put together a really good spreadsheet to walk you through all these costings. Recommend having a look at that because it gives you a bit of an idea of what's actually involved and what you actually need to think about when you go to set up one of these harvest weed seed control systems. So yeah, if cost is an important driver, then definitely recommend having a look at that spreadsheet, which is on the RE website. And yeah, if we've got time, Tom, happy to answer some questions.
Any questions for Dr. Walsh here around harvest weed seed control and the effectiveness of it? He's done a hell of a lot of work, Michael, over the years. I don't know if you want to bring up
Michael, someone just asked about stripper fronts and capture of ryegrass.
stripper fronts. Sorry, Mike, can you hear that around stripper fronts and catching ryegrass?
Yeah, no, we've actually got some really good data on that that says that stripper fronts are just as effective as draper fronts in collecting ryegrass seed. So we've done tests on about, I think, 10 different machines now, and we found that we're getting 80% plus ryegrass seed collection from ryegrass plants that are present in a crop when you're harvesting with a stripper front. So that was really good news, and it was a bit of a sigh of relief for us when we figured that one out, because we thought that stripper fronts might have been the bane of harvest weed seed control systems, but no, they're actually pretty good overall.
I had a question on yesterday, Michael, we got asked around effectively minimising or reducing the weeds in the chaff line. Has Guy Coleman, your little protege, done any work on his lasers with chaffline lasers?
I haven't been quite game enough to start lasering chaff lines just yet. We've only really done that work looking at individual weeds, which is to say that yes, lasers will kill your weed seedlings quite easily. Taking that out into the field, we've got a fair bit of development work to do that just yet.
There is some interesting stuff, Mike, work on. Yeah, you've got a little laser boom spray that knocks out weeds, which is a very interesting project he's got running. And I think Guy's gone over to States now, has he, Michael?
Yeah, he's over in Texas at the moment. He's doing some work on developing weed recognition algorithms. So yeah, hopefully he can progress that quite rapidly, because we definitely need to be pursuing that.
Any questions any further before we head out and have a look at some of the gear we've got available here?
Just a quick one, Tom.
Yeah, here we go. There's that second mic behind us.
Yeah, just wondering the effectiveness in a narrow windrow burn of having the chaff underneath all the straw as opposed to maybe laying on top.
Yeah, look, the effectiveness, the weed seed kill efficacy will be better if you can keep the chaff above the straw. It just means you've got more airflow underneath. So the effectiveness of narrow windrow burning is all about airflow. If you can keep the air going through that windrow, then you do get a hotter burn. The challenge is trying to keep that chaff above the straw. Some of the early work we did, we found that by the time you got to autumn, most of the chaff and the weed seeds in particular were on the ground underneath the straw.
Yeah, I just question the stripper fronts and saying that they do this as an effective job. On most years, our wheat crops around here are waist high, and most of the ryegrass, by the time you get to harvest it, not much more than ankle high. And I can't imagine that stripper fronts, people would be running them right on the deck to be able to pick up the ryegrass. And so, unless I'm wrong, I couldn't see those stripper fronts working properly if you were running them right on the deck. So,
Is that because you can talk to ryegrass and grind around with 5 years worth of seeds on that?
no, it's already doing it before that term. I mean, I think it might be okay in lighter crop conditions, but I'd be very pleased to be proved wrong. But I think most guys around here agree with me. The ryegrass, and by the time you get to it, it's only up this high, and so I'm rather sceptical about these stripper fronts doing a good job. Unless you've got the ryegrass up the height of the wheat, I just can't see it working.
Mike, got a comment there. I'd probably say that, yeah, if you get in the front, it's going to work the same, isn't it? But there's a difference in crop. Like you wouldn't normally put your front down there anyway.
Yeah, so you're right. There are a few things to keep in mind that. Okay, so to make sure that you've got your ryegrass going up in the canopy, you do need to be using narrower rows. So the instances where we've seen the stripper fronts haven't been as effective is if you've got a lighter crop. So, you know, it's only like a 2-ton crop and it's on 30 centimetre rows spacing. If you narrow up your rows a bit more, it makes the ryegrass go up through the canopy a bit more, chasing light. And also, if you've got high yielding crops, that helps as well. So more crop bulk means more competition for light, which means the tillers go up. It does get to a point though where if you've got really big crops, and so 7-8 ton crops, the ryegrass gets stretched so much, if you like, the tillers get really thin, and then they start sitting down in the crop canopy. So that can happen in really big yielding crops, but it's probably not much of an issue then in trying to target those weeds, because your crop competition has done such a number on the ryegrass anyway that it's a bit futile trying to chase those plants.
You see that, Jake?
Sorry, what was that, Tom?
Few heads shaking at the moment. Obviously, still an issue. But
So yeah, so I think the key is that you can put the stripper front down at beer can height if you're really wanting to do the same job as what you would do with a draper front. But again, obviously it's a matter of choice and necessity, I suppose, too. If you're chasing the ryegrass, then it does have to go lower. But also, if you've got issues with rocks and sticks and things like that, that also needs to be a consideration.
Yeah, well, others in the room here might disagree with me, but I mean, we like to think we're in the 4 to 5.5 tonnes of a hectare area, and even better. But I'd say 90% of the time, even in crops like that on 250 mil raised spacings, or so if you're any more than 5 or 6 days past maturity, getting to harvesting, the ryegrass is just starting to lay down. I mean, I've just observed it over many years. It doesn't stop standing up at the head height, it just lays down in our environment anyway. And I disagree if you only got a few plants. A few plants 1 year, 2 years later, you've got to blow out.
Well, I guess, yeah, look, I'm not going to challenge it, but I guess maybe the proof is in the pudding. Have a go with a narrow shoot or something like that, and see if you do collect anything over a strip, and yeah, and that'll prove wrong.
challenge. It's a constant challenge with anything. If you can't get them in the front, you can't control the HWSC control system is slow. So you've got to make those changes. If you're going to cut it off lower, make changes to your capacity and try and get a more paid machine so you can handle the material. It's just,
When you're on the under the cutter bar.
yeah, just cut above it and then come back again with the header again, cut it there lower. 2 times.
We've done that.
It's the same with anything in the farm system, though. Even if you change one thing, then there's always going to be changes that result from changing something in the system. It's a constant movement of piece. You'll figure it out for us, Owen, and then let us know.
I was just going to make a comment that there's a bloke over at Wagga by the name of Dan Fox. He done a trial with his stripper front doing this very thing with ryegrass seed, and it was within about 1 or 2% comparable to a draper front. So I think it's a little bit of a systems approach, maybe. Narrow rows will help the problem. So I think it's one of the things, I think sometimes when you suck it and see, you get a different result than what you think.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that Dan Fox story. That was where we did one of our first trials. And so, yeah, Dan's on 6-inch row spacings. And it was a pretty good crop. It wasn't last year's crop, for example. So I think it was probably 3 tonne or something like that. But it was definitely the narrow rows that really help out in that situation. Where we did look at a similar trial on his neighbour's place, who's on 12-inch row spacing, not quite as big a yielding crop, but not much different. He had to run the front a bit higher because he had rocks, and it was the same with the draper front too. He had to cut that a bit higher, and it was, I think, in the high 60% seed collection compared to Dan's about 80% seed collection. So yeah, it is a lot about trying to get in the front.
Any further questions to Michael before we have a stand up and wander around? Michael, thanks for the week, mate. We appreciate it. You're always the last on the TV, so you have to sit around for most of the time, but we appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the opportunity, Tom. Enjoy the rest of the day.
No worries, the rest of you on there as well. We'll be heading off. So to look at some of the equipment we've got in person. So we'll talk to you all later.